Steve and Felicia Baruch. The parents of Lauren Baruch. Both of them passed away in that tragedy. Susan Arundel, she's a mother of Alicia Arundel. Alicia was in the car, but praise God, survived. And Donato Panico, he's a friend of the Shulmans, okay? And what I want to say about these people before I start is thanking them for coming. It is very hard to do something like this when you've suffered so much. And the scriptures say that one of the noblest things a person can do is light a candle instead of cursing the darkness. When something like this happens to you, you say to yourself, why me? And you could get angry and turn in on yourself and just hate the world. But strong people have the ability to say, I want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else, even though my daughter is gone. And that's why we're here today. So let me tell you what we're talking about here. We all have heard about the tragedy that occurred in upstate New York just 2 weekends ago. 20 innocent people, 18 of whom were in a stretch limo, passed away. But the brave people here were impacted by another accident, tragedy, by a stretch limo crash in the East End in 2015. What caused the latest crash upstate is being investigated. We're here today because the federal government can do a lot more to make sure that tragedies like this, the one that happened in Schoharie County and the one that happened in Cutchogue, don't happen again. And that's why we're here. The problem with these stretch limos, for every inch they stretch, they become more dangerous. And they are unregulated, basically. They have fallen through the cracks. They're not cars, they're not buses. And so they don't get the kind of regulations that we've had. So in terms of the structure of the limos, they lack impact airbags, they lack rollover bars, they lack seat belts. All other vehicles have to meet federal safety standards, but not these stretch limos. So after the tragedy that these people unfortunately were involved in, I asked the NTSB, the premier safety organization, to investigate it and to come up with regulations, suggestions as to how to make these limos safer. They didn't do it. But they did go up to the accident in Schoharie, and yesterday I met with Senator Gillibrand, I met with the head of the NTSB, and they are going to put out regulations shortly based on what happened here, there, and other stretch limo accidents. And once they put out those regulations, it will be up to the NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency, to enact them. They have the ability to enact them, but I'm going to make sure they do, using my authority as minority leader in the Senate with say over their budget. But we're here on a second issue today, not the structure of the limos, but the drivers. And that's what we want to talk about today. The FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, regulates rules and requirements for drivers of commercial vehicles. All states, including New York, must adhere to what the FMCA does and what the FMCSA requires. And the tie that binds us in all of these is something we all have, a license. I'll show you mine. Every one of us has a license, but if you're driving a commercial vehicle, you have to have a special license called a commercial license. It requires more training and puts you more at risk if you're negligent in how you drive your commercial vehicle. Stretch limos, this license can be a tie. When it comes to the aftermarket stretch limos, the license which is the tie that brings us to safety, is gone, non-existent. That's why a law right on the books mandates, right now there's a law on the books that says that if your vehicle carries more than 9 people, you need a special commercial driver's license, okay? But in cases like this, because the limo has been stretched, no one's looking at them, and the license requirement is never enforced. The limo that these folks were unfortunately involved in, the limo that crashed up in Schoharie County, by law, the driver should have had a commercial license, but they didn't. And that's what we're here for today. We are demanding that the FMCSA launch a license crackdown and say that every stretch limo has to be driven by a driver who has a commercial license, not a regular license. And if they don't do it, we look out of their funding, they're going to have trouble. So I'm asking them today to do it, and I expect that they will. That means they have to have their personnel notify every stretch limo and limo company about these rules and tell them that they're going to be subject to federal fines and other penalties if they're not enforced. And then they have to make sure that they are enforced. This does not apply to regular black cars or regular limos. It applies to stretch limos, any vehicle that has that can carry 9 people or more. That's the law. We don't need a new law. We need enforcement of existing law. The message these brave families have is very simple, and that is that if all stretch limos were classified as commercial vehicles, drivers would be required to carry a commercial driver's license, undergo more extensive training, and the limos would be subject to rigorous inspection, repair, and maintenance regulation. Okay? It's that simple. It's on the books. It just needs to be enforced. The stretch limos exist in a gray area. They're not a car, they're not a bus. But they are classified as a commercial vehicle if they carry 9 or more. And it has to be enforced. So, that's what we're here to talk about today. There have been numerous accidents. We need, number 1, the structural standards to be enforced, and we need the license standards to be enforced. Both are federal laws. Both must be enforced. I am here to assure these families that I will do everything in my power so that their plea is enacted. And I asked one of the parents, I said, you know, it's a terrible tragedy, and the only peace you can have is knowing that your daughter is in heaven and at peace. And he said, I'll know that if we get this done. That is enough to importune all of us to make sure that these loopholes are closed and tragedies like this don't happen again. With that, Paul Schulman, father of one of the girls who was lost, is going to say a few words.
Hi, I want to thank Mr. Schumer for coming out and giving us time. I know he has a busy schedule, and all the family members behind me, I want to thank them because they've been beside me with this the whole way. This has been a group effort, all of us. I said this before and I'll say it again. If this goes into effect, then I'll know my daughter was taken for a reason. That the laws that needed to be fixed and changed are changed. The way it works is it's a Class E license. Anybody standing here right now can go to motor vehicle with their Class D license, tell them they want it switched to a Class E, and pay the difference. You can walk into a limousine company and drive a limo. Anybody that operates a limo should have to drive the limousine with a CDO license just like anybody who operates a minibus school van. A limousine is at least that size and length, and you're operating the same thing there. Whether it's a 5-year-old or a 95-year-old, it doesn't make a difference. It's all about training. I was told by a person that raising the age for a Class E comes into effect. The person who operated the limousine in upstate New York, I saw his face once before I knew anything about him, and I said that he falls between the ages of 45 and 55. He was 53. The operator of the vehicle who drove our vehicle was 54. If two people who operate vehicles who've caused this much tragedy in their 50s, what makes anybody in their right mind thinks that raising the age to 25 is going to make a difference? It's about training. Everybody here had to be trained in what they do now for a living. You should be trained to operate a limo. It's all about putting somebody behind the wheel of a vehicle who's never operated a vehicle that size before. You have to know that you have to make wider turns. There's 10 people in the vehicle. There's more weight in the vehicle. It takes longer to stop a vehicle, just like it takes longer for a tractor trailer to stop. These people are not properly trained. They have to be trained. And that's what this is all about. And the safety standards. They said that there was a safety bar that was put in the limousine that was operated with our daughters inside. Well, when the van hit it, the bar was below where he hit, and the bar wasn't strong enough. There was no seatbelts, there was no airbags. There was no push-out windows, there was no exit doors. There needs to be a lot of things put into for safety standards for all the occupants. They make sure that there are refrigerated trucks for anything that's going over on the road with refrigeration. Why aren't they meeting standards to protect people's lives? That's what all of this is about, and I am hoping with the help of Mr. Schumer and with Mr. Zeldin and Mr. Flanagan, who is with us, that together, collectively, with the families and everybody as a collective effort, that we could do this, and it's all about saving lives. That's all this is about. I cried when I saw what happened upstate because it could have been prevented. And I don't want anybody to have to walk our shoes anymore.
Well said. Okay, we'll take questions to me first from the media.
Senator, so to be clear, the driver involved in the upstate crash and in the Norfolk crash, neither one of them had a commercial driver's license?
That is best we can tell upstate now. They're checking it all out thoroughly, but I don't think so, and certainly not here.
And what does the state DOT require for stretch limousines? How does that fit in with what the federal?
The state can make its own requirements, but only if they're more stringent than the federal law. So if the state wants to go further, we're going to sit down and talk about that and see what should be done.
What does the state require now? Does the state require them to have it?
I don't think they do. The state is not our...
How a commercial vehicle works is it works. How commercial vehicles work is it works by weight. If it exceeds a certain weight, then it automatically now becomes a commercial vehicle.
Which is not the federal law. The federal law goes for number of passengers carried regardless of the weight.
That's why you'll see on some stretch limousines, if you've noticed, when they really, with the super stretch limousines, it'll have another axle with wheels in the middle. It's the same thing like a truck. When you add another axle, when you go up in weight, you now go up into a commercial driver's license or a commercial it now becomes a commercial vehicle. So now the limousine company, based on the weight of the vehicle and the weight of the passengers, has to pay more insurance. They now have to pay a driver, because a driver who operates the vehicle with a CDO license gets paid more than somebody with a Class E license. So now it all becomes back to money with everything else. So they try to keep it under the CDL. That's why sometimes I've spoken to people who rented limousines for their family members, and sometimes you'll see seats removed out of the limousine, or there'll be things that are not in it that are supposed to be in it. It's to keep it under a certain weight, so it doesn't go into the CDL class.
Senator, how are they skirting the federal law? And
No one is enforcing it. The federal government, the law's on the books, but no one is enforcing it. We're here today to get them to enforce it.
when was that law enacted in the federal law?
I'll find out, but it's been on the books for a while.
And who is supposed to be, I mean, are they supposed
The
to...
Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, known as the FMCSA, has jurisdiction. They're the ones who've got to get with it, close these loopholes, and get it done.
Or is that agency supposed to be checking
Yes.
season drivers before limos go out on the road, or only when there's...
Well, what happens, no, they're supposed to have them, you're supposed to be required by federal law to have a commercial license if you drive anything with, and they do it with trucks, they do it with buses, they don't do it with stretch limos.
Or if it's anything over 9 people?
9 or more.
9 or more.
So they don't do inspections on these limos? Like taxis get inspected, right?
That's state law, but yeah, they have requirements when they are made.
So you don't have to put, there is a state law in place.
There is a state law in place.
And now you want another law?
No. The federal law says the federal law supersedes any state law. It's stronger. And that's what we want them to be enforcing, those laws here.
Senator, so are limo companies just lying about how many passengers they're carrying?
They're
Is that
not,
a problem?
look, they have to, the whole stretch limos, I guess they didn't exist when this law was passed or wasn't as prevalent. They have to go to any manufacturer and any company that hires them and says, here are the rules, you have to obey them or you're going to get fined and punished. They're not doing that now.
If the federal agency doesn't do it, you did mention looking at their funding. What do you
Yes.
mean by that?
Well, this is their responsibility. It's not that there's no law in the books. There is a law in the books, but I will go to them and they say, well, we need more money for inspectors. We'll get it for them. But if they don't do it, we're going to hold them accountable.
I'm wondering if we could ask either Felicia and Susan to comment at all on this issue.
I don't. They don't.
We're here in Morristown, so-
Mr. Schulman speaking for all of them.
Has the FMSCA responded to your request?
Not yet. I have the NTSB, which we've asked not to do the licenses. They don't have anything to do with licenses, but has to do with the safety standards, roll bars, what Mr. Schulman mentioned. They're going to come out with regulations on those. But then it's so complicated, the way they set up these laws 30 years ago, it's a different agency than these two that has to enforce it. And that's called NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency.
Senator, how would you apply this to the millions of school buses and millions of students riding?
School buses are much better regulated than these. That's the problem.
There are no seatbelts or airbags.
Well, that's
in
the
school
state.
buses,
The state is supposed to, the state has to decide whether there should be a seatbelt law for school
Senator.
buses.
Would this be a federal issue? I mean,
Well, we
we're
could
not
make it a
talking-
federal issue in the past. We have looked at, the federal government has been responsible for commercial licenses because it's interstate commerce. These things go across state lines. And for the standards because it's manufactured and sold across state
What
lines.
about commuter
School
rail?
buses generally don't go across state lines, so it's state
How
regulated.
about commuter rail, subways, mass transit, Long Island Road, Cushing North? I noticed you put it.
We have, those are federal, and we put in things like PTC for those
I
things.
noticed you brought your driver's license. You have a Metro card, but you come out here by chauffeured limousine.
No, I didn't come out here by chauffeured limousine, and okay, thank you. Okay, yeah.
What about
Yeah.
other
This
safety
represents
enhancements
the
like
public, sir.
Yeah.
mandating seatbelts on stretch limousines or reinforced steel beams on the side? Do
Yes.
you think there could be greater oversight into?
Yes, there has to be much better oversight of this loophole in the law. They're not cars, they're not buses, it falls through the cracks. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.